This is Book TV's Afterwards podcast. This week, Lou Dobbs, host of the Fox Business Channel, offers his thoughts on the president's agenda and America's future. He's interviewed by Victor Davis Hanson, author and Hoover Institution Senior Fellow.
Lou Dobbs, before we start on this recent, quite fascinating book of yours, The Trump Century, I've got to ask you a question. You worked on and off for CNN for some 30 years. Mm-hmm. You had a variety of shows. You were not an orthodox Republican. You were obviously not a liberal Democrat. Could you go back into that environment today, or someone like you? Or what was the calculus or the formula that allowed you to exist for 3 decades? Did you have a particular relationship with Ted Turner, or just enlighten us a little bit at the fascinating development?
Well, it was helpful that I joined CNN in 1980 at the beginning. I was one of the founders of CNN, one of the fortunate ones who was there I was president of creation, as they say. And it was a spectacular place to work as we built it, because it was something unthought of before Ted Turner. The global cable newscast, and he put it into action and institutionalized it. It was really, truly remarkable. But it changed over time, as these things do. And we founded it in 1980, and by 1984, Ted was on the Forbes the wealthiest list, and had been basically on the verge of bankruptcy, as just 4 years earlier when he founded it. So his position changed, so did ours. Suddenly we're in the White House pool, we're growing. And over time, Ted's commitment to a more liberal approach to the news became far more serious and emphatic. And by 1999, it was clear that it was going to be a tough balancing act. But at that point, I wasn't so much an advocacy journalist. By 2009, when we had our final falling out, not with Ted, but with Time Warner, it was just simply a matter of ideology. I was saying as many critical things about George W. Bush, perhaps more, than I ever said about Barack H. Obama. The truth is, they were committed to a different approach. They decided it would be ideological, that there was only room for one point of view instead of a tent with many voices. And I was the only conservative on the air. And obviously that just did not work out. And if anything, it's gone in even more decided fashion to the left, rather than to either independent journalism or to moderation, as you know.
One last question before we get to the details of the book. In this 3-decade evolution of CNN, you sort of broadened from more specific interest in business or the economy to a wider panorama of news in general, politics, economics. And you started to fashion, as I watched you during these years, that you had a certain worldview that would not be easily categorized on issues of trade or immigration. Right. That started to emerge. Did you ever think that there would be a candidate, not a third-party candidate, but one of the major 2 candidates for the presidency that would dovetail with this formula, this ideology that you had been over 30 years gravitating to? Did you ever think it would happen like this?
Honestly, Victor, I didn't think we would see it perhaps in my lifetime. I was hoping that we would, but I've known Ted Turner, Donald Trump, for as long as I'd known Ted Turner, but we weren't friends. It was a professional relationship, and I watched as this man stepped out, and by 2016 running for president, and I have to tell you, I rejoice, because he was independent-minded. He was secular, if you will. He was even agnostic about his politics, as he's acknowledged. And for me, that was exciting because, first of all, that meant he wasn't allied with either the Republican Party or the Democrat in ideology, in philosophy. But he was allied with patriots and this country. I blanch every time I hear the expression white nationalism in this country. It's nationalism. It's not white. It is every color, every creed we've got. Being an American nationalist means that you embrace the Constitution, which is our great assurance of equality, of equal opportunity, of respect for all citizens. And he embodies that. He truly does. And so I was very excited to see him run, and it brought me back to the Republican Party. I was an independent, I think a fierce independent in most respects.
You, in the book, you outline these 4 or 5 signature issues, ensuring that immigration is legal, measured, meritocratic, and not illegal, and overwhelming the ability of the so-called melting pot, getting tough with China, favoring fair rather than free trade. You didn't buy into the idea that the industrial Midwest was tired or played out, that it could be reinvigorated, and you were very skeptical, as I read the book, of these optional military engagements, specifically in the Middle East, that in a cost-benefit analysis didn't play out either for us or for the region at large. But there were other third-party candidates that had picked up on some of this, Pat Buchanan maybe, or Ron Paul.
Right.
What was it about Trump? Did he incorporate these issues within the broader fabric of traditional conservatism, or was it his personality? Why did he succeed when these other third-party people had found utter failure at the national level?
Yeah, the third-party candidates that I've known, and I'm glad you mentioned Pat, because Pat was unreservedly an independent thinker, irrespective of his political preference for Republican. He was a conservative. The difference for Donald Trump is he was beholden to none of the establishment. This is a clash of so many influences in our society, what we are contending with now. But fundamentally, this is a clash with an establishment that controls both political parties, or did, until the arrival of Donald Trump. Donald Trump broke through and said, I will take on the orthodoxies. I will be the disruptor. He will represent the forgotten man and woman in this country. He pledged to do that, and within days he was doing that. He's one of those surprises that and delights that we rarely have in politics. He's a man who said what he meant, and he kept his promises. And that drives the left, the establishment, mad, because he's taking on this multi-trillion-dollar business roundtable. It's 135, 140 CEOs control a huge part of our GDP. He took on the Chamber of Commerce, and their ridiculous mantra that free trade is the boon to the American economy, when it was certainly not. We financed the rest of the world, certainly, and Wall Street did great. But one of the reasons a working man and woman in this country didn't share in that for some 20 years before Trump and had stagnant wages and less opportunity is because it was a financial benefit for the elites, but not for the middle class, which is the foundation of the country.
In your book, you have a chapter, jobs, jobs, and that's one theme that ties together almost everything in the Trump century. And it's true that he had record unemployment for minorities in 2019. I think he got down to 3.5. He almost got 3%, or did almost, annual GDP. And the point I'm making is that what you say was a two-pronged assault on the left and the right, and it was a populist, empathetic message. And why do you think that if he gave, say, to take one example, inner city youth, for the first time in their lives, they were being bid on, their labor was being bid on by employers rather than begging employers, or he created a situation that empowered the powerless. Why do you think that empathetic message or that attitude never was picked up or never resonated? He didn't really emphasize it. The media didn't like him. But why do we not think of, we being the public, that Donald Trump was the most empathetic and concerned president about the lower and middle classes?
Because he doesn't speak in the same language as the elitist of both parties. They have a lexicon all to themselves, and it's programmatic. It's about what they will do. It makes a number of assumptions. They are talking about the dependency of those who are in the inner city, who are low income, and that's the basis. It's a condescension of government that's wrapped up in the idea that without dependency, what is the role for government? And we have now a huge permanent bureaucracy that requires dependency on the part of a good-sized number of our people. They've gotten used to it over 65, well, since 1965, when the war on poverty began. We spent over $22 trillion. And we have everything but a measuring bureau, a metrics bureau for success. No one wants to follow up on Black youth in the inner city and what happens to them when they go to these public schools that are run by unions rather than by their communities. It's a strange world we've created, and one that both parties have been perfectly content until now to permit to continue the status quo in perpetuity.
You know, another theme, as well as the Trump jobs program and its success in creating employment that we hadn't seen in 50 years, is China. And you talk in a variety of contexts about China. Prior to Trump, I think everybody felt that China, everybody, meaning among the elite, bipartisan elite, that China was ascendant. The more concessions we gave to it, the more they would repay that gratitude with magnanimity on their part. They would become wealthy, they would democratize, they would westernize, they would take over the world in a general way. We would manage decline, I think, as Obama put it. You come along and say, Trump stopped that ascendance in a variety of fronts, but what I'm interested in, the general idea, you never really thought, as you suggest in your book, that China was all that strong and was predetermined to rule the world, but it had intrinsic weaknesses that we either didn't see or we didn't want to see. But I never got from your book that you felt that there was this steamroller that was inevitable, that there were contradictions in its whole mercantile plan that you were trying to warn people about. With strong action, we could stop it.
I started 20 years ago talking about the Red Storm rising. We've known for a quarter century that China had front companies operating in this nation with only one purpose, and that was to steal our technology, our military secrets, take them back to China, and exploit our technological advances. And they saved themselves a lot of money on investing in education, actual research and development of their own. And that's what they've done. We built China in some respects, as the president put it. We literally built it. They're taking $600 billion a year from us in our intellectual property, stealing it. They have been running deficits with this country from the beginning of the relationship. We have been in deficit to them in trade, and we have shared our technology both openly and willingly, as well as permissively permitting their theft. It's been an extraordinary, unprecedented relationship between a wealthy power and an emerging one. At no time was it required of us that we be the global chump that we played. And we did it under Clinton, Bush, Obama. You couldn't have asked for a trifecta of worse presidents to string together in the national security. It's devastating to look at what we have squandered. And we did so with the sure knowledge. Joseph Stiglitz, who is a left-wing Nobel Prize-winning economist, but a brilliant man, and he warned us that what the wars in the Middle East would amount to. He just didn't give us a sufficient warning. He told us it would cost $3 trillion for our adventurism in Iraq, and it ended up being $6 trillion and counting. In addition to the lives we've lost, we have gone through a period of madness that is remarkable, and it took Donald Trump to step forward. I love this expression, Trump derangement syndrome. Victor, he's the only one who wasn't deranged in the entire city of Washington. It's really quite something to behold.
One of the things you point out is how insidious this presence is, and we saw it with the NBA that has developed a $5 billion market that not only balances off or offsets the losses it's suffering with its declining domestic viewership, but changes the ideology of the NBA itself, where they're more critical about any misdemeanors in the United States, and they ignore the felonies of human rights and re-education camps, racism, Hong Kong, and China. And the same we found out recently with Hollywood, that part of the anger at the racial makeup of movies was in part a reaction to directors who were under orders, or at least perceived orders from China, that China wanted lighter skinned actors. And so how do you, in your book, you have a lot of ideas, but how feasible is it at this late date, given the insidious presence that we don't even feel, we can't even detect it, that's in sports and entertainment, media, politics? Because they seem so much more adept than the Soviets during the Cold War at understanding weaknesses.
I infer from your question that you're suggesting that we can't change what we wrought because we are so inextricably intertwined with China, which is insidiously, as you suggest, enmeshed itself in our economy, in our society, even our culture. As you say, Hollywood right now is editing their films, indeed shooting their movies, in many cases, with a cant to Beijing, because they want their international market to be excited about their product. It's no longer for a U.S. audience. It's no longer a U.S. product. We went through a long period where it was no longer, it was always an American product, but for an international audience. That product coming out of Hollywood now is a international and Chinese product, and the United States market sort of tags along behind it. It's a major, major change in our society and our culture and business, the business of entertainment and media, because this gives Beijing inordinate influence. Their values are being represented in movies in many cases, much more than U.S. traditional American values. And the world knows it, they see it, and by the way, they're accepting it.
I know it. One of the things you talk about is the China lie, and let's go to the Wuhan virus, if we can use that term, the virus that originated Wuhan, China. Sure. Right. It seems that all of the narratives that we were told, that it didn't really emerge until January, when we knew it was known far earlier in the fall of 2019, that it emerged accidentally in a wet market from pangolins. We know that narrative has been discredited. So I think there is a consensus that it came out of a lab, but whether it was accidental or whatever the narrative goes, what was their attitude about it? Why did they allow direct flights into SFO and LAX, say, for 12 days after you couldn't go from Wuhan anywhere else in China? What was their thinking, you think, forget about the origins or whether it was accidental or intentional, but what was their mindset about it that unleashed this thing from Wuhan and really destroyed the Western economy in a way that we never thought would be possible?
As you say, this virus was unique. Was it engineered? We still can't say scientifically with great empirical evidence or judgment that what it was. Was it natural? Was it man-made? But we do know for a fact that whether accidental or engineered, the Communist Chinese government knew for months that it was transmissible, human to human, and they knew very early on that it was deadly. They hid those truths from their own people, of course, but they, very importantly, hid the truth from the rest of the world, the WHO, the CDC. And what people may not realize is that the US public health institutions and some of the best doctors in all the world are great friends and colleagues of doctors in China. And that's fine. But we also took a part in funding their research. Think of this. We also helped them design their version of our CDC. And there was a certain cockiness, overconfidence on the part, I believe, of American doctors that they would be forthcoming. They had a professional medical relationship with individuals that they thought would obviate any communist institution in Beijing or Wuhan. They truly believed it. None said it to me, but at my discussions with them from January on, those doctors, they were very, very certain that they would know best about what would be going on in Wuhan, even as that virus was unleashed by the Chinese Communist Party on the world, an unsuspecting world, and did not acknowledge it. I declared on my show, Victor, that it was a viral pandemic 2 weeks before the WHO would move to that point. The CDC wouldn't call it a pandemic because the WHO hadn't called it a pandemic. The madness of this moment is, again, like so much of this, it's just stunning. And we had so much to catch up with.
You suggest in your book that the fact that we were in election year 2020 and we were engaged in a veritable trade war with China at the time served as force multipliers of the acrimony or the world hysteria or the divisiveness back home, and they inadvertently or by design helped they were these divisiveness and this acrimony, hysteria all played into China's hand in a certain way, because we were not able, we being the Western world, were not able to focus in a unified manner at what they were doing and what they were saying and what the WHO was. But it was kind of coincidental. We were right in this trade war that you spend so much time eloquently defining, and then you say, well, there was this virus right in the middle of it. It just, historically, it's very odd.
It is very odd because they are counter events that are not necessarily in conflict as far as the Chinese are concerned. You can almost see the deft hand of Chinese intelligence in all of this. It's not a reach at all to consider the possibility of this being engineered and purposeful in the Chinese interest, because they have managed, inadvertently or otherwise, to have taken down the economies of Europe, the United States, all of their chief competitors in the global marketplace. They have killed hundreds of thousands of people across the world, infected others. The effect of those infections, the long-term effects of those infections, we don't know. But we do know that the Chinese have been the net beneficiary of it all. And they are the only ones responsible for this infection, this pandemic that has claimed so many lives and has sickened so many millions and cost trillions of dollars in lost GDP for the world, not just the United States. So I'm very suspicious of both the coincidence, the convenience of just who benefited from it, because we also know that the Chinese consciously shut down travel outside of Wuhan, but effectively encouraged international travel to Europe, to the United States. And guess what? By March, we were having the virus come back into this country from Europe, as well as from China and Asia. So that if one is not suspicious of all of this, one isn't paying attention. I really personally don't get lost in whether or not they engineered the virus. The reality is that they made an unconscionable decision to not warn the world of what they knew was a deadly virus that they had unleashed upon it. That is a moral responsibility. It is a conscious immoral decision that they took.
Another theme that even characterizes the chapters on domestic policy and the Trump achievement on the economy, jobs, deregulation is this theme that you keep going back to: globalism versus nationalism. And when you look, a couple more questions on foreign policy. When you look at the world and you see the United States withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, the United States withdraws from the Iran deal, the United States jawbones NATO in a way that really got people angry to up their contributions to meet their 2%. And then suddenly we move the embassy unilaterally to Jerusalem. We say the Golan Heights are not going back to Syria. Now we see this new nexus between some of the Gulf states and Israel, and Iran seems to be out in the cold. So what's your assessment, not just on the ideology, but the efficacy? What did he do when he decided to pursue sort of no better friend, no worse enemy attitude abroad, the Trump administration, rather this ecumenical globalist, we're all, part of the brotherhood of man?
He looked at a world and saw the absurdities of the decisions that were being taken. I hear some people sort of dismiss that as a businessman's hard-edged reasoning. I call it just intelligence and knowledge of what is actually transpiring internationally. The first act, by the way, by this Congress, the first act of the Congress after our founding was the Tariff Act. And he exploded the idea that a tariff would destroy the economy. It's interesting to think of the things that we don't hear being spoken about in the public arena anymore as a result of this president. You don't hear people saying that nonsense anymore. You don't even hear the expression free trade, do you? Because now the whole country knows that the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, and Wall Street were lying through their teeth when they said it was hardly a zero-sum game, children. This makes us all rich and wealthy and powerful. Well, we built up a huge external trade debt and lost trillions of dollars in economic growth as a result of those deficits, particularly with China. He applied that same reasoning and clear-eyed thinking to the wall with Mexico. He was not only building a wall with Mexico, but at the same time negotiating with Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the president of Mexico, to join forces and put thousands, tens of thousands of Mexican troops on the borders of Mexico to stop illegal immigration. Does he get credit for that? No. But it's what he did. And as a result, illegal immigration into this country, despite the recent surge, is still at the lowest in decades. So he's been immensely successful. But again, the left-wing media won't credit him. That whether it's NATO or the Middle East, as you say, this is a man who gets nominated for 2 Nobel Peace Prizes for two separate advancements of the interest of peace, and he can't even get the national left-wing media to acknowledge one of them as having been made. He is fighting against more evil, seditious forces arrayed against him, whether it's in the media, whether it is in the body politic or his own party, for crying out loud. And he has to fight them through every day and win.
What you're saying kind of resonates, or it reflects the subtitle of your book, how the president changed the course of history forever. So if I follow you, you're saying as much as he was opposed, he hit on a reality, a truth, that convinced even his enemies. And so that after Trump, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, you're not going to hear calls that says, don't pressure NATO, let them pay what they want, or let's get back into the climate accord, or the Iran deal, we've got to get it right back, or let's watch out for those Gulf states and their nexus with Israel, or maybe we should stop the sanctions on Iran, or let's stop the wall. But you're suggesting that he did things whose very success convinced his enemies, almost as if he said the emperor has no clothes, look at it, and now the dialectic's been changed, you think?
Without question. I would phrase that somewhat differently. What he has demonstrated is that the assumptions of the liberal foreign policy establishment have been dashed by this president's successes, because he did in some cases the opposite of what they would recommend or what they would expect or insist upon. If it's NATO, how dare you suggest that the United States won't pay that bill? And we have great benefits that that result from our deficit spending to support our wealthy European friends. Or in the case of the Middle East, you have to sate all of the Palestinian dreams, desires, and wishes before you even begin to deal with organizing and aligning the interests of the Arab states in the region. He did the latter. The result is Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and we know that from his statements that 5 other nations are waiting to join in a new relationship with Israel, working together and assuring peace in the region. And yes, confounding Iran, which has been not only the largest state sponsor of terrorism, but it's responsible for killing 1/3 of our troops in Iraq and never being held to account.
So what you're saying is, if Joe Biden were to be president and he said, you know what, Trump was all wrong, we've got to put the Palestinians back into the center of all Middle East discussions, we've got to reopen the Iran deal, we've got to be very skeptical of this Israeli goal, that would have no resonance now, because he's changed the entire conversation by his success to such a degree that it would be very hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I
believe that. I hope that. Amongst the many variables in our this political year, one of them is the national left-wing media. They have become a 5th column operating in this country rather than the 4th estate. They're not performing as watchdogs. They're working as political arms, action arms of both the Democratic Party and simultaneously the corporations that own them. AT&T owns CNN, Comcast owns NBC, Disney, with all the cute little Mickey Mouse pictures, it puts a nasty reporter into the White House briefing room every day who doesn't look nearly as cute as Mickey Mouse. And they have an agenda. And when the president talks about fake news, Victor, he's not talking about, in my opinion, adequately a structure that the American people need to understand. we have such a powerful consolidation of media power in the hands of a powerful consolidation of economic power, whether it be these vast media companies and technology companies, and then Silicon Valley, which, I mean, they have the power, the economic power to absolutely block so much of what any other president's agenda. It just wouldn't happen. It's the reason it hasn't happened until this man had the courage and the vision to stand up and say, this is not right. It's why he's called for antitrust actions against the FANG, a group of technology companies, against Silicon Valley, and insisting that there be a change in the relationship between these monster media companies that control fake news. The American people are awakening to it. And I think these polls that show that they are somehow dullards and will buy into the idea of the Biden-Harris ticket, I think it's fantasy land.
You have a chapter on that in the book on big tech, and I think your argument is that, as you said, I don't want to use the word twice, but they have an insidious way of warping the news, whether the order of a Google search or deplatforming a Twitter account, and the bias seems to be predictably one way. And with $4 trillion in market capitalization of Facebook and Google and Apple, all confined in a little place, you talk about regulating it or stopping that monopoly. And it's almost as if that hasn't happened because big tech says to liberals, this money is at your disposal. And they say to conservatives, you are libertarian, free market, laissez-faire, so it's against your philosophy to even regulate us, and then they find that soft spot between the two parties. And then you in your book, you say that something has to be done before this octopus strangles all of us, as far as it's a daily utility that we all depend on. And what do you think we can do about it?
Well, first we have to identify just how vast and powerful that octopus really is, because the interest not only of Hollywood and those media companies, and which extends all the way to those reporters sitting in the White House briefing room, have a closer alignment in many cases financially with China and Beijing and the Communist Party of China than they do with the United States and the interest of this nation. It's amazing to imagine it's almost inconceivable to imagine that a government, the United States government, is a minor influence on corporate America to the degree that it is. The FTC, take the regulatory agencies, the FTC, the FCC, you name it. They are basically gnats swarming on a very large animal that is indifferent. And this president is trying to reintroduce that, along with William Barr, the only possible countervailing influence against such power. And that is regulation and the ability to define markets and the actors within it, which has not been done for a very long time. You have to go back to Microsoft, and that, which was a failed antitrust action, but it nonetheless was the last one that it was even attempted. After this election, I think you're going to see a highly energetic Donald Trump administration taking on these critically important issues because the nation depends on it, absolutely depends on it.
One of the things that I'm not sure if your readers will agree or disagree, but you dwell a lot and focus on interest rates in the Federal Reserve, as does Donald Trump. And I think maybe you could clarify some of the confusion that I have, that when I started farming, I'm sitting in this farmhouse that my great-great-grandmother built. I thought we were getting pretty good production credit rates at 14%. This was in 1980. And every time I'd buy a bag of sulfur, it would say $2, and I'd go in and I'd see that 6 or 7 prices had been crossed out, $2.10, $2.20, $2.30. So that was how that inflationary high interest rate. But now, essentially, people are purchasing homes at 3.25%, 3.5%. Your middle class citizen that's not familiar with real estate or stock market is, if you count moderate inflation into the calculus, they're getting zero on their passbook accounts. The debt getting up to $27 trillion is financed basically, and it's manageable because we have de facto zero rates when calibrated in inflation. But you still seem to be worried that the Fed tends to want to raise interest rates too high at particular times when it's not warranted by the expansion of the economy and the threat of deflation.
Yeah, well, the answer is, I have a simple view on interest rates as it pertains to the Federal Reserve and monetary policy. No economist ever envisioned the Federal Reserve would raise rates for any other reason than motivation for price stability and the onset of inflation. And this Fed, under Jerome Powell, raised interest rates four times after he was put in place by Donald Trump. And then the left-wing media started clucking because President Trump was saying, wait a minute, you're trying to kill this economy because it'll benefit me in my re-election bid. I mean, that was really what he was saying. And it will shut down 3% GDP growth. It will alter the job opportunities in this country horribly. And he was right. And then the left-wing media wouldn't acknowledge it. They raised rates four times, trying to do what? I have no idea. Milton Friedman didn't teach me that one. My professors didn't teach me why you would raise rates in anticipation of a market that you could not accurately predict at all over anything beyond 6 months. And that's what they kept trying to do. And Jerome Powell is, after all, an investment banker. He's not an economist. We've got lots of lovely economists in the Federal Reserve, but economists are not world renowned because they are particularly prescient and accurate in their forecasting. They are the inverse. And you have to follow markets if you are in banking or if you are in the central bank. And Jerome Powell was doing none of that. So I applaud the president again mightily, because he was right to stop this nonsense. He did. And Jerome Powell, while he would never acknowledge that the president was right, he calmed down and it ended. And then he announced a new policy at the Federal Reserve, which no one would point out also resembled precisely what Donald Trump had been saying since the absolute incipient point of their little disagreement over interest rates. Without the presence of inflation, what in hell are you doing? And that, by the way, put Trump in a majority of one as the president of the United States against the wonks on Wall Street, the quants on Wall Street, all of who were looking to make money on a little extra volatility that would be introduced by further interest rate increases. It was and the stunning economic historians who said, "Oh my gosh, presidents cannot just sully the great pristine white marble of the Federal Reserve by criticizing it." That's over. That's done. Won't happen. You'll see presidents even more energetic in the future, I'm sure, as they should be.
George W. Bush, as you pointed out numerous times, and you were very worried about it, doubled the debt almost doubled it. It's sort of controversial whether he quite did it. We know that Barack Obama then doubled that debt. And so we went into the Bush administration when he started with about $4 trillion, and then we went into $8 trillion, then we went up to $17 trillion. And now Donald Trump he's running a $4 to $5 billion trillion-dollar deficit this year for this stimulus. At what point do interest rates have to be de facto near zero, or how are we going to, are you worried about servicing that magnitude of a debt? And while Trump got more revenue from his stimulus and his deregulation and tax cuts, he wasn't successful in pruning the cost of the federal government. So where do we end up if we don't do something? And what should we do?
Oh, it's a great question. And I wish I could give you the exact answer, Victor. But I do know that we're in a place we've never been before, but not because of fiscal policy choices that we happen to make in pursuit of a brilliant strategy. This was all reactionary to a virus that tore this economy up. We watched the most, as the president would say, the most beautiful economy we've ever seen in this country's history, torn asunder by a virus from Wuhan, China. And we don't go looking for wars, but sometimes wars find us. That was the better America. We didn't go looking for this virus, but it found us. And I can't even imagine what other choice we had other than to stimulate, other than to add trillions of dollars to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet to assure liquidity adequately to get through it. I believe we're coming out that side. I don't think that we, by the way, should be putting another $3 trillion into a stimulus bill as Nancy Pelosi wants. And it's horrible to think that we're talking about the difference between 3 trillion and 1 trillion. Once you start talking trillions, we've got a big problem.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed, and I was reading your book this week, is that almost every other page you point out the role of the courts, that either whether it was a travel ban or whether Donald Trump was about the wall or an exec, he was challenging the courts. And the expectation was that after 2017 or during 2017, Trump's opponents had lost control of both houses of Congress. And one of the ways to check his executive power would be to turn to the courts. And they did so, as you point out, successfully. Now with this sad passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we have this frenzy we're looking at right before the election. And each side there's the Biden rule or the McConnell rule. Really, there's no rule other than the U.S. Constitution that says
exactly.
The president nominates, the Senate advises and consents, which in popular parlance means either confirms or doesn't. The Democrats lost the Senate in 14, 16, and 18. I don't know why Harry Reid did, but he ended as you remember, the Senate filibuster on judicial appointments in 2013. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was very confident that either Hillary Clinton would win or Donald Trump, after 4 years, would not win re-election, because when she was much more vigorous, but in 81, she was 81 or 82, let's say 2013 or 14, when Obama had the Democratic Senate, and he could have easily replaced a distinguished jurist at 81. That didn't happen. So now we have this unique situation where the president has the Senate, and a liberal jurist passed away with a desire to be replaced by a liberal jurist from a conservative president with a conservative Senate. How do you put all this together, and what do you think will happen, or what do you think should happen in this very delicate situation, and also the politics of it? If you would just comment, because the courts seem to be, I think you got a really good point, that they've become almost a legislative branch that is more important or has more power than the executive branch sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that we have to somehow restore those constitutional balances. That Constitution insists on checks and balances. Our founders envisioned those checks being in place among three equal branches, with the executive leading the government. This has been, to me, one of the great revelations over the course of the past 2 years in particular has been the degree to which the federal judiciary has been politically corrupted. John Roberts, the Chief Justice, famously said that there are no Bush judges or Trump judges or Obama judges, suggesting that there is no partisanship on the part of those judges and justices. Well, poppycock. We know right now, the American people are not fools. We look at who appointed a judge, and we look at their decisions in the appellate court in particular, and we know how it's going to go. Whether it's right now, General Michael Flynn, the Justice Department has dropped charges against him. And the courts in D.C., the D.C. appellate court and the D.C. district court judge, Emmett Sullivan, in this instance, refuse to dismiss the charges. And this is a man who's been persecuted and for 4 years. Forget anything about the rest of the case. There is no prosecutor except the courts itself now. This is not envisioned in our Constitution. It's not envisioned in law. They're just doing what they want because it's politically in their interest. And that's stunning stuff. Where we end up with the courts is going to depend greatly on whether or not we reelect Donald Trump. It's essential that we do and restore originalism to the interpretation by our judges of the Constitution and law.
You know, one of the things that you talk about is that the opponents of Donald Trump not just oppose the president without military, first president without military or political experience or a nationalist populist agenda, but they seek structural changes. They want to change the dialectic or the environment or the landscape itself. And you see that if Trump were to lose in 2020 and he were to lose the Senate, that we would see things such as a court packing scheme or the voter compact effort to accelerate to end the Electoral College, or perhaps statehood to DC and Puerto Rico. Because I ask that because the theme of your wonderful book, The Trump Century, How the President Changed the Course of History Forever, assumes that the present system, within the present system, the Trump achievements are going to be eventually recognized by both sides because they hit on reality and truth. But if the system is changed or the structures are modified so we don't have electoral college, or we have 52 states, or we have a 15-person Supreme Court, all of this beginning in 2021, do you see that those structural changes will change the very foundation in which we're talking today?
There's another presumption, and entreaty within all of that, as you note, that he wins this election. Because in winning the election, he assures this country's destiny. Without Donald Trump in that White House, all bets are off. There is no way that anyone should dismiss what is happening in the party of hate, the Democrat Party, as simply rhetoric, as simply a political squabble. This is a battle for the soul of the nation. It is a battle for the direction of the nation, and indeed for who we will be as a people. And I don't mean that to be melodramatic in any way. It's just the fact. You talk about suddenly Puerto Rico and DC are states. That changes who we are. That changes what we are. Because that means then the Democratic Party has sufficient power to pack that court, to insist upon might as well just simply go straight to totalitarian, because that is what the left wants here. They don't want to be bothered by little things like law or a constitution or history or heritage or consistent and constant virtuous values. the idea that a political party can threaten death and destruction on the streets of America and still be regarded as a political party, to me it's nauseating to see what the Democratic Party has become. Now, my colleagues in media don't, for the most part, care to talk that directly about it, but I do, because I believe that's exactly what we're staring at. And it's a very ugly face indeed in American politics right now. The choices are tough. They really are tough, that we're going to have to make over the next several years. And we're going to need a tough leader. And this president has proved he's tough, he's strong, he's smart as hell. By the way, they never want to acknowledge how smart Donald Trump is. They always say he's got great instincts. I love that idea. He's got great judgment. He's a great leader. He's smart, and he cares about this country. And I'll tell you, I'm praying he wins, because that's my way of praying for the country.
We're out of time, Lou, and it's been a fascinating discussion. The book is The Trump Century, How the President Changed the Course of History Forever. These and other topics that we discussed, again, a lot more are in the book. It's an argument that not just Donald Trump has achievements that have been underappreciated, but that he has achievements that in time history will see as a bipartisan consensus, and he really destroyed the previous conventional wisdom in a way that even his enemies will have to concede. And with that, Lou, thank you so much for coming on C-SPAN Book TV, and it's been an honor to interview you. Thank you very much.
The honor is mine, and I thank you so much, Victor. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's Afterwards podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. You can send us an email at podcasts@c-span.org.